Life.Church created this podcast because we all need healthy conversations with real people. So this podcast is here to help you start real conversations with your life group, friends, and family. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the You've Heard It Said podcast. This is Jason.
And this is Abigail. And I need to share something I've realized as an adult.
Okay.
I really don't like having hard conversations.
Why not?
I just feel like hard conversations are messy, they're uncomfortable, they're not fun, and they make me want to run away from the situation. And I know that's not healthy.
Right.
But I also joke that I don't have fight or flight like most people. I have flight or flight. It doesn't matter what it is. I am running the opposite direction.
So that's true of like any hard conversation.
Yes, any hard conversation, anything that's uncomfortable, anything that seems unbearable.
I go around starting hard conversations on purpose sometimes. I think that they help us get to where we need to get and become who we need to become. Would you at least agree that hard conversations aren't easy, but they make things better?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that's honestly what encourages me or gives me that extra little push to actually have the hard conversations, even when I really don't want to, is knowing that it makes things better.
So today's topic could be a hard conversation for some people listening. And don't do the flight or flight thing. Stick around.
Right. You definitely want to stick with us because working through the hard conversations and uncomfortable feelings will ultimately make things better. So today we're talking about grief, and our big question is this: what is grief? What is it for? And how do we live through it?
And to help us answer this question, we're going to listen to some stories and conversations that we've had the last few years about grief, including some very practical help from our friendly podcast therapist, Kay.
So when I was in the 4th grade, I lost my mom to a battle with breast cancer. And losing a parent at that age is so tough because you're old enough to understand the finality of what happened, but not old enough to really have any other perspective on grief. At least I didn't anyways, especially not of that magnitude. It just felt like a nightmare I would never wake up from. I couldn't see any end in sight. My world was so shook I would have dreams about my mom doing simple, mundane things like making me pancakes for breakfast, and that was it. And then I'd wake up and she'd still be gone. It was just an incredibly, impossibly difficult time of life. And people helped me and my brother and my dad through the grieving process in all kinds of ways. And everyone means well, I think, but not everything is super helpful. I had responses as short as, "Dang, that sucks," to just straight up avoiding me and being afraid to talk to me. And I think they were trying to give me space, but it just kind of felt like I had the plague.
When I got married, instead of putting my identity in being a child of God like I should have, I was wrapped up in being a wife. So when my husband filed for divorce, my world fell apart. I was so ashamed that I'd let my marriage fail that I hid it for months. I let my secret pull me away from my family, afraid they might think less of me. I didn't know who I was without him. I felt lost and alone, broken, unwanted, and unlovable, like I was damaged goods. I was so afraid no one would ever want me again, and that I would always be alone.
A few years ago, I was laid off from a job I loved about a week before Thanksgiving. And at the time, I definitely felt undervalued, felt betrayed by management. I felt like I'd lost a connection to my work family, that I was separated from all my future career prospects, things I'd really looked forward to. There's also financial uncertainty around how my family was going to live since I was the sole income provider at that point. And it really robbed me of being able to enjoy the holidays since Thanksgiving was the next week and Christmas was just a few weeks later.
So immediately following my miscarriage was a whirlwind of emotions and experience that I'll never forget. First of all, coming from a family where miscarriage really isn't a thing. So I felt very alone in all of it, not knowing anyone else who had experienced this. I felt of course, grief over this loss of a life. A loss is a loss, no matter how early in a pregnancy. And going through all of the emotions of grief over not only losing a child, but grief that my body wasn't doing what it was designed to do. Shame that I had failed at what God had called me to become, a mother. That my body had failed me, had failed my husband. I wasn't really angry with God, but I just felt numb to it all.
I can't begin to articulate and express just the soul-crushing grief that I experienced when I lost my little brother, Matt. Even at 36, he was my little brother and just the person that had always been in my life. The fact that he wasn't in my day-to-day is just like trying to pull out threads of him that are woven into who I am. And there's an indescribable pain. It's also unbearably numb. And I didn't know that I could make it through a day if I were to continue to process how I could get through another 40 years of life. But without him.
So, Kay, as we were talking about grief, we know that you have so many good things to say. And so we wanted to have you on. And could you just tell me a little bit about grief? Like, what is it? What can we do about it? How can we help other people? Just tell me all the things that we know that you know about grief.
Okay. I do really love this topic because I feel like often we attribute grief to just being the death or a loss of a loved one, but the reality is it can be any sort of loss. Grief is at its core the deep sorrow that is caused by loss. And so under the umbrella of loss, there are lots of different things. It can be a sense of change. It can be a disruption. It could be a loss of a loved one, but it could be situational. Maybe you've moved. Maybe you had a school or a job change. Maybe you had a routine change. Or maybe it's relational. So maybe someone in your family is chronically ill, or you have a loved one that has a mental health disorder. Then you have the separations or divorce, remarriage, blended family, abuse, or neglect. Or it can be even unfulfilled dreams. So maybe you didn't get the job, or you didn't make the team, or you're not talented or skilled enough in one particular area. Maybe you've been rejected recently by a group of people. Maybe your parents aren't together, or maybe you've experienced infertility. The reality is loss can look like many different things. Loss is often layered as well. So for instance, if you're going through a divorce, then not only is it the loss of marriage, but it's loss of time with your kids if you have them, loss of in-laws, loss of family future holidays or dream trips that you've decided to take or a home that you've built. And so sometimes a present loss can have all the future losses accompanied with it. And there's really no limit to the examples of loss because it's really all about how a person perceives his or her situation. So if a person thinks there is a loss, then grief can be present, even if others don't fully get it or agree with it. In fact, there's a term that Kenneth Doka developed, and it's called disenfranchised grief. And that's the grief when someone incurs a loss, but it can't be openly acknowledged or socially sanctioned or publicly mourned. And so some of the things we just listed might fall in that category. And so while most people would say, yeah, those are disappointing, we might not say they're worth grieving over. And so what this does is this says that there are different kinds of losses. And so sometimes we might even do this to ourselves. We might say our own loss isn't worth being that upset over. And so we'll miss it. We'll just keep going and we completely miss it. So what does it look like? How do we know if we're grieving, or how do we know if someone else is grieving? And so maybe as you listen to this, ask yourself, when was the last time I actually experienced any one of these things? Can you identify if you felt these? Maybe you've been on edge more, irritable or angry. Maybe you felt sad or down or felt like a weight is on you. Or maybe you have found yourself thinking about the loss more and more, so your thoughts are circulating about one thing a little bit more often than normal. Or maybe you have increased worry about something or someone else in your life leaving. Or maybe you felt numb or apathetic recently. So when you start to recognize some of those things, then you can look at the situations and your life events and say, man, have I experienced a loss? Has there been a sense of change or some disruption in my life that now I can really recognize I am actually grieving? And if you've ever actually grieved something, so oftentimes people will say, well, when will this be over? Like, how will I know I'm to the end and when am I through this? And the reality is there's no playbook. There's no timeline. It's not this pretty little line that you go through and you get to the end. There's not stage 1 and stage 2 and you find this eventual elusive closure. And so a lot of times people will ask about the stages of grief. And this is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, and she identified denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And these were written in her text called Death and Dying. And it was from her work when she worked with terminally ill patients. And so rather than these being steps that you go through, it was more what people commonly experienced at the end of life. She didn't mean stages of grief as in you move from one to the next to the next. It was just things that you might experience as you're grieving. And so when you have a family unit that experiences the same loss, people might do one of these, two of these, all of these, and they're going to do them at different times and in different ways. And so you can see how there's a lot of friction that can occur or frustration because people think it should look this way, or we want a timeline, or we want it to be in this nice little pretty box. But your denial could look like maybe you're resisting the reality of loss, or maybe your depression is you don't even want to get out of bed. Maybe you might be really angry, or maybe you're the one that wants to fill in the if only I had statements. And so just kind of knowing that these are common things that people experience when they're grieving can kind of help ourselves and other people as they start to navigate some of this. So what can we do with the people in our lives that are experiencing grief? Well, the reality is we can give them a huge gift by simply being with them. And we often describe this as a roller coaster, right? Because in one moment they can be deep sorrow, then they can laugh, and then they can change the subject, and then they can be angry, and then they can laugh again, or then they can be sad. And it does often feel like it's all over the place. So like a roller coaster. And what we can do is we can offer empathy. We can acknowledge their experience and loss. We can listen to them. We can cry with them, and we can laugh with them. Sometimes we can simply be with them, and our presence is enough. But we can also help them by avoiding having our own agenda for them. If we don't try to move them along from their sadness, we don't have to have an answer for their why questions or their if-only statements. Not minimizing what happened to them or offering another perspective. We don't have to try to make them feel better. And knowing that their experience isn't about us. So not jumping in when they share about their loss and immediately saying, oh, I know exactly how you feel. This is what happened to me. But just sitting with them in that moment. And it can be really uncomfortable when you're sitting across from somebody who is sobbing or is really angry in their grief. It can be really uncomfortable in that moment. And I think we all tend to want to just have some comfort to offer. We want to make them feel better and ourselves feel better. And so we end up saying very painful statements like, there's a reason for everything, or I know exactly how you feel, or be strong, or God never gives you more than you can handle. This must be a part of God's plan. Or look all you could be thankful for. I've heard that one. Or they're in a better place now. But to the hurting person, that can be even more hurtful because even if they logically agree, what you're saying is that their present hurt shouldn't hurt and that truth should simply make it okay that it happened. But what I've found is that people get there on their own. And they do it better and healthier and quicker if we don't push them, but instead we acknowledge their loss. We acknowledge their experience. and we're just simply present with them. So simply saying, I am so sorry, and being with them is the most helpful thing you can do. You don't have to have the magic words to comfort them. They don't really exist anyway. And sometimes people need professional help. They want that. And so you can normalize this and say, man, if you want to go to therapy, it's okay. It's very normal for people who are grieving. And here's a trusted person I know, or here's a trusted counseling center I know. And you can go the extra step and you can connect them with those people that you already know. And that can help with them in a time that they're feeling very overwhelmed, not to feel so overwhelmed about taking that step for themselves. So grieving any kind of loss is very, very hard. But for ourselves and others, it's so important to acknowledge the loss, be attuned to how it's being experienced, knowing that you're going to experience it in different ways than other people, and then just giving yourself the space and the grace to just navigate all of that.
You know that moment when something big, bad, or sad happens in your life? Or maybe you just watch some totally sappy but great movie, and all of a sudden you realize that only a few things in life really matter. And none of them are actually things, but more like people and relationships. So we think a life group is a place to find those people. And if you don't already have that, would you just think about joining or starting a life group at www.life.church/lifegroups.
Honestly, the people who helped me the most were the people who were just honest. They just asked how I was doing and then listened. They'd sit in silence with me if need be. They wouldn't try to fix me or read me a list of helpful things. They were just there. And sometimes they'd ask if I wanted to do something like go ride bikes or hit golf balls, and that was great too, because I think my friends and family who were really helpful understood that you can experience joy and grief at the same time. And sometimes you need to remind yourself that you can still have fun, that you're allowed. And I think God meets you there because that grief and that joy are both such deeply human things, and you need to remember it's okay to experience both.
So I think initially people mean well, but it's hard to know exactly what to say when someone is grieving, especially if it's a grief process that maybe you're not as familiar with. So I remember comments that were meant for good actually stinging. So comments like it's all in God's timing, or miscarriage is common. It happens to a lot of women. So those comments that are meant to comfort were actually not what I needed to hear. So some great things that people did do for us, though, and do for me was like our life group surrounding us in prayer, and so many loved ones bringing us food to our doorstep, and just allowing time for my husband and I to go through the grief process together and create an open environment for me to talk and just cry, which is really what I needed most.
I spent a lot of time just staring at walls and processing. And God showed up through people in amazing ways. And some of them would just grab me and hug me and pull me out of it. Others would just come and sit down next to me and stare at the wall with me. And others would share stories. I found a large body of people who loved my brother and loved me just because I was related to my brother. And I also had those people who were just genuinely good people that loved me and wanted me to be healthy and to know that they loved me and that they were there for me. Just be willing to talk about that person, because anybody going through grief who has fond memories of their loved one wants to hear stories. They want to talk about them. They want to share stories. And years later, they'll want to hear stories from other people because those are experiences that they never got to have themselves. and it still breathes life into the person who's just not walking with us anymore. But people are pretty awesome if you allow them to be a part of that process. And for those that don't know what to say, well, just sit still and just be there with the person. You don't really have to say a whole lot. It's just your presence matters.
Over the next few weeks, I definitely heard from a lot of people. Some suggested that I should just settle for whatever first came along. Some thought they had it worse and thought that was helpful to hear. But a lot of coworkers did reach out, shared that they thought I was a valuable team member, gladly connected me with contacts at other companies. I had family that offered to help support us during that time and offered a safety net if things got too bad before things got better.
Thank God for my women's life group. They were the only ones who knew how much I was struggling. They sat with me, cried with me, took my calls no matter what time it was, brought me food to make sure I was eating. And they didn't try to give me advice, but encouraged me to listen for God's direction. They called out the lies I was telling myself and constantly reminded me who I am in Christ. I'll never forget how they were there for me when I needed them most.
So here's what I'm hearing, not just from Kay, but also from some of our friends who shared their stories. We just need to be with people. I think that can be a hard thing for us to think about because we want to help or we want to make the feelings get better, but we just need to walk with people through their grief. What do you think, Abigail?
I think you're completely right. I was in a conversation with a counselor a few weeks ago, and we were talking about how we can bring hope to situations that honestly feel hopeless in the moment. And I'm not sure what answer I was expecting, but it was definitely not the one that the counselor gave. She said that sometimes it's not even the words you say, but the fact that you were there that matters and makes a difference. So creating and being comfortable or even embracing the discomfort of being in a space where there's mourning and being okay with just sitting with that person in the moment and validating the hurt that someone's feeling can make all the difference. And when she said that answer, in an instant, I had so many flashbacks to the friends who sat with me in the midst of my own grief at different points. But then I was also at the same time picturing the friends who I sat with in the midst of their grief. And I realized the truth of that statement.
So I'm going to put this back on you, Abigail. You said your tendency is to want to run from hard conversations. If it's not a conversation, if it's just you being there with someone, is that still just as scary?
No, I don't think so. I think sometimes going into that feeling and those feelings and the discomfort can feel really intimidating and make me want to fly very fast in the opposite direction. But I think knowing and giving myself permission that it is not my job to fix the grief or to fix the hurt makes it feel doable.
Yeah. And I think this can be true for the person who is grieving also. Mm-hmm. So what I'm saying is, if I'm grieving, I need to be okay sometimes with just being in it, with feeling it, with letting it happen, and not having the right words, ideas, or actions to try to make it better, but just letting grief do its work.
Yeah.
So this reminds me of Romans 12:15. The Apostle Paul writes, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn."
I love how Paul makes this point so simple. Mm-hmm. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Another scripture that I really like and that has helped me recently is Matthew 5:4, which is from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. And I read it earlier this week and just saw it in a new perspective. It's Jesus talking, and he says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And I read it, and it was just this reminder that sometimes I'm the one who is mourning, and my natural tendency, again with the flight or flight, is to keep it to myself. I don't want to take it to people. But when I let other people in to sit with me and to be a source of comfort, I'm able to find healing, and the healing process is able to start. And then the other half of that verse, for they will be comforted, that's the reminder that at other points, I get to be one of the people who God can use to bring comfort to someone else who is in the midst of mourning or grieving.
So here's the question for you to talk about this week with your friends, your family, and your life group. Is there any grief that I'm currently processing that I need to share with others? And is there anyone in my life who's grieving who I can support?
And remember, you can find these questions and more in the conversation guide, which is in the show notes.
Have a great week.
Hey friends, we hoped you liked this special podcast series on mental health. If you like these conversations and want to keep going, you should visit www.Life.Church/mental health. This page has tons of resources like blog articles, Bible plans, and more. You might even bookmark this page and share it with a friend. Have a great week.